Greetings, Connor McLean here. This is my JTC 311 class project. For this assignment, I chose to focus on cell phone cameras and their impact on photography, and just talk about how they are changing the landscape of photographic practices. So to start, I wanted to begin with a brief history of photography. As we've seen through the lecture notes, prior to the ability for images to be captured, reproduced, manipulated, things that we're used to in the year 2020, we see things such as oil paintings, book illustrations, stained glass, and then in the late 1700s, Zenfelder developed the practice of lithographic printing, where he would, or whoever was making the image, would use oil, fat, or wax to create the image and then press it onto a smooth, flat, either limestone or sheet of metal, kind of like a stamp to create images. So things like book illustrations and the other examples, they're ornate and they look nice, but they're pretty labor intensive, and you're not actually, or people back then were not actually capturing images in space and time of that specific moment. The idea for doing this goes back centuries, the idea of the camera obscura, but things didn't really begin to get going until Joseph Nicephore, who's credited with using or creating the first photographic image, was able to do that, exposing a pewter plate coated with bitumen of Judea. But as seen in the lecture notes, this took about 8 hours. So still a lot of time, but this spurred other people to begin experimenting, developing, and we see the daguerreotype process, in which they would use copper and silver plates, exposing them to light, and then they would develop the images over hot mercury, as it said in the notes, which doesn't sound like the safest practice. So the theme we're seeing here is that it takes a lot of processes, be it with chemicals, metals, but also cumbersome equipment. The lecture notes pointed out that back then you needed pretty much 4 parts for the camera. So the big wood boxes, the shell, which were heavy, kind of a drag to carry around. Then there would be a lens made out of glass to focus the image at the back of the camera, which would then go onto the plate of either copper, glass, pewter, and then that would then be transferred to a medium. And then in the later 1800s, close to the turn of the century, after Eastman invents his film, we see the idea for picture taking in cameras starting to change a little bit. And this quote from one of my sources, which was written by Lisa Guy in 2007, it's an article titled "The Impact of Mobile Camera Phones on Personal Photographic Practices." And there's a quote in there that said, "Kodak no longer promoted the camera's instantaneous capabilities that were a novelty in 1888 promotions. Instead, the idea of a snapshot's value was an aid to memory was promoted." So there's the switch of being able to actually take a picture of what you want, kids, your house, whatever, and being able to actually keep it so that you could reflect on it. And they kind of started changing how this was done by charging people the fee for the camera, but then it came, I believe, with 100, capable of 100 photos, and then you would mail it back in, the consumer would mail it back into the company where they would develop it. So everything was being done in their factory, and this is kind of when photography started changing. So let's get to the main topic of my presentation. So, which were the first cell phones to contain an actual camera in them? So I found 2 articles, and both of these phones were mentioned as being some of the first to house a camera in the phone. So per Digital Trends, Samsung in 2000 released the SCH-V200. It was, in the top left image, it was a phone with the camera built in, capable of taking 20 photos at 0.35 megapixel resolution, so about 1/3 of a megapixel. And quote, "The camera and the phone components were essentially separate devices housed in the same body." And I like that quote because it really shows that 20 years ago, so 2 decades ago, still kind of figuring out how they're going to make this work. It's yeah, they made it all into into one shell in the same body, but it's still two separate entities. Another one of the pioneering phones that had a was one of the first to contain a camera was the Sharp J-SH04, which I found on a Times list of all-time 100 gadgets. And it was kind of comparable in terms of picture quality and stuff, but that was only available in Japan. So when did the United States get involved, especially for consumers? So in November 2002, Sanyo released the SCP-5300, $400, so quite the price tag. But now they were starting to, so 2 years later, this phone included a basic flash, timer, digital zoom, and then some After Effects like sepia and black and white. So let's fast forward to 2020. It seems like every year phones are getting more and more impressive, and just as an average consumer, it seems that more focus is being put on camera quality, and what these phones can do in terms of photography. So I pulled these specs from two of the biggest phone companies in the world and their flagship phones, the Apple iPhone and the Samsung Galaxy. The Apple iPhone 11 Pro Max, which is the highest model, comes with triple 12 megapixel cameras on the back, which are an ultra wide, a wide, and a telephoto. So to put in perspective, the very first phone was capable of taking 1/3 of a megapixel, whereas these each are 12 megapixel resolution. Now it comes with 10 times digital zoom, and then we have things such as panorama, portrait mode, effects and editing tools that are you can't even count. Night mode, red eye correction, 4K video recording at up to 60 frames per second, and our front-facing cameras can now do things such as facial scanning to unlock your phone. The Samsung Galaxy is pretty comparable with the three cameras, except the telephoto camera is 64 megapixel. So what does this mean for taking photos? In today's age, camera phones are often as good or better than most consumer-grade cameras. There's the exception of high-quality professional cameras that can go for thousands of dollars, especially with specialized lenses and things like that. But it kind of begs the question, why buy both when now the camera is an essential part and component of the phone? It's not, as previously seen, two devices built into one body. It is now a main component of our devices that we carry around. And so another quote from my reference that I talked about earlier from Lisa Guy: camera phones are not, however, just another kind of camera. Located as they are in the device that is not only connected to the telecommunications grid, but that is usually carried with us wherever we go, camera phones are both extending existing personal imaging practices and allowing for the evolution of new kinds of imaging practices. And I like this quote, even though it's a little outdated in terms of this project. It was written in 2007. The concept of social media, and especially with picture taking. Instagram is one of the biggest social media apps out there. I think it has close to 80 million users. And as she referenced the telecommunications grid, people love the ease of using their device to take a picture of what they're eating, where they are, beautiful sceneries, selfies, and posting them immediately. This is changing. Instead of taking the camera, taking your pictures, having them developed somewhere else, and then waiting and getting them back, now we can do all of these things with 3 clicks. So another reference that I found was an article written by the Center for Photography at Woodstock in New York. I believe his name was Harry Jacobson. He wrote that, contrary to popular belief and common hyperbole, the smartphone has not changed photography in itself. Photography is still inherently about the recording of something real, something that existed in time and space. Along with that, he said, regardless of manipulation and editing, the image begins with a lens capturing something. What has changed radically and in a very short period of time is the landscape of photography, the space, physical and social, cultural and historical, in which we collectively approach this medium. And I like that quote because it's showing that, yes, photography is still the same concept. Nothing has changed about photography, But the way that we're approaching it and creating it now is drastically changing. We can do things with our phones that weren't possible 10 years ago. And to go with that, I liked this image. So it's just a picture of a generic camera, pictures or photography now and then. So pictures you take with this camera, 24. Pictures you develop, 24. Pictures you look at, 24. So even 20 years ago, before cameras were being implemented into cell phones and then smartphones, you had to use your camera, take the pictures, take it in somewhere to be developed. I remember going to Walmart as a kid with my mom, waiting for the pictures to get developed, shopping, and then on the return, dropping them off, doing some shopping, and on the return run, picking up the pictures at the end. And now it's kind of a joke, but you take 4,000 pictures of your dog, of what you're eating, selfies, where you're hiking, but you never really go back and look at them because, yeah, they might be saved on there or in the cloud, but now we're so used to taking so many pictures of little things, of everything around us, that it's changed how we're taking pictures.